What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast, where me and my good friend and co-host over there, Danny Torkel, talk about horror movies and streaming shows. For weeks now, you guys have been enjoying our Interview with the Vampire TV series reviews, and so we decided to kick things up a bit and talk about the 1994 adaptation of Interview with the Vampire starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and the not as great Queen of the Damned from 2002. So, Danny, you were saying to me before that these videos have been doing well, but that the Queen of the Damned video hasn't gotten as many views. Why do you think that is the case?
Because it's Queen of the Damned.
Oh, yeah.
It is rather hilarious that since really over the last month, whether we were covering the Omen franchise or the Planet of the Apes franchise or the Interview with a Vampire series, all of the shorts that I've put up on our channel have gotten fairly good views for us. We've been in the hundreds of views, and then Friday morning I posted a Queen of the Damned short. And as of today, it is standing with a very Tommy boy 7 views.
Oh.
And I think that is a perfect encapsulation of how the world remembers the 2002 Queen of the Damned, which we'll talk about in due time. But I'm really glad that we're going to be talking about these movies today because we've been talking so much about the Interview with the Vampire universe, the Vampire Chronicles universe created by Anne Rice. We are diehards of the AMC show. We love season 1, and so far season 2 has been on par or better, thanks to the inclusion of these the Theatre de Vampire in France with Ben Daniels as Santiago, and it's just been fantastic so far. So to go back and to be able to talk about these two films, which I believe are the only two film adaptations of Anne Rice stuff, which is crazy to me because she has a 50-year writing history.
Right.
And she was considered a contemporary of Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And we could probably name 50 Stephen King projects. We could probably name 50 bad Stephen King movies.
Right.
And the fact that Anne Rice's world has only been touched on twice in movies. One of them was a huge success with some of the biggest stars of the time. The other, not so much.
Yes.
Maybe this new AMC series, maybe the Immortal Universe, as they're calling it on AMC, can generate, interest in another Anne Rice film project. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I had a ball. I had a blast going back and rewatching the 1994 movie, Interview with the Vampire. I hadn't watched that probably in a couple of decades.
Oh,
so,
wow.
And then watching Queen of the Damned for the first time, I believe I said to you, and I posted this on the short that is up on our channel, it's the most 2002 movie that has ever existed.
Yeah. It's to its detriment, unfortunately. And the 1994 movie and the 2002 movie are so different from each other. It's ridiculous. The only similarities are the names of characters, and then otherwise they are very, very different beasts. You were talking about how Anne Rice has been around for her works have been around for 50 years, and then it's surprising that there's only 2 adaptations. They purchased the rights for Interview with the Vampire in 1976 when the movie came out. And there's a term that you hear a lot when you do research on movies, development hell. Apparently, Interview with the Vampire was in development hell for decades before they were able to make that first film. And what's really interesting to me is the choice of director, right? Because they picked Neil Jordan, an Irish filmmaker who the reason why they picked him was because The Crying Game had been such a huge success. I haven't seen The Crying Game like as an adult, but I've seen parts of it as a kid because my mom was really into it. And then I remember I saw this movie called The Butcher Boy when I was in like a third world cinema class, and that was a film by Neil Jordan. And I thought that was really excellent too. I think that it's an inspired choice to make Neil Jordan the director of this movie. And one other thing I wanted to bring up too was that this movie cost $70 million to make, which Neil Jordan himself said that was totally unusual for a vampire movie. Like you have Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola, which was an inspiration for Neil Jordan, but he was saying that like vampire movies always seemed like they were like low budget and like a lower quality, and
Well,
he wanted to make good.
look at the. I mean, this movie came out in 1994. Bram Stoker's Dracula came out in 1992. If you go back to the late 80s, the vampire movies that we were getting, while they were good, they were like dirty and gritty, and they didn't feel like The Lost Boys doesn't scream big budget movie.
No.
You know, Near Dark by Catherine Bigelow does not scream big budget movie. I think there's one major explosion set piece at the end of that movie, but the rest of it is like a gritty road movie.
Right.
And, you know, the early 90s, like the first half of the 90s, we got Bram Stoker's Dracula, we got Interview with the Vampire, From Dusk Till Dawn comes out in, I believe, late 95, early 96.
Yeah.
And you started to see more bigger budget horror.
Right. In general. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is interesting. I remember the hoopla about The Crying Game. I feel like that movie came out when we were about 10, 11 years old.
That's right.
And it was a thing. And I think a lot of it had to do with the androgynous character played by Jay Davidson and the love story. It was a very, strange love story in that. And it wasn't something that you saw, portrayed in film very often,
Right.
especially like a critically acclaimed Oscar caliber film. I think that movie was nominated for several Academy Awards, but it's also the first time I had ever seen Stephen Ray in a movie, and Stephen Ray would carry over with Neil Jordan to Interview with the Vampire as Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the more evil characters in that movie.
Yes.
And he has one of what is probably the most memorable scenes in the movie, the almost Groucho Marx style like mirror scene in the street with Louis, with Brad Pitt in France, which again, I hadn't seen this movie in it had to be decades, and I don't remember that scene. So I'm watching it as if it's the first time, like, wow, this is like, and one of my favorite comedies of all time is Duck Soup. So I'm like, this is the Groucho and Harpo scene in front of the broken glass with it. And it's just, he's so menacing in Interview with the Vampire. And he's one of those actors he feels very reserved, even in The Crying Game. I think we brought up last time we were talking about he's fantastic as the lead cop in V for Vendetta. Also,
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of like the exposition character in that, who's like explaining the story to the audience, and I love him in that. I love his voice. So it's very straight. If you just look at those three movies, he's had a huge career. He's been in so many movies.
Right.
If you just look at like The Crying Game, Interview with a Vampire, and V for Vendetta, it's three totally different roles, and it really shows you how good of an actor he is.
Yeah. I think it was very wise of Neil Jordan to bring him into this movie. And I know that, like, for Neil Jordan, one of the things, because, Neil Jordan is from Ireland. And I know that, like, in the 90s, the whole, like, Northern Ireland thing was a much bigger deal than it is now. And I know that that's reflected in the Crying Game itself. He was attracted to this movie because of the idea of Catholic guilt. And he said that, like, obviously, like, Louis' experience is like a metaphor for that. He's got the vampire guilt, and then, of course, there's characters like Santiago that have no guilt whatsoever, and they are like totally free and uninhibited. What's interesting to me is that when you watch this movie and you do research on it, you start to see that Anne Rice wrote the screenplay. And then you do a little more research and you see that one of the conditions for Neil Jordan was that he had to write the screenplay for this movie. So he goes uncredited, and then Anne Rice gets the credit for the movie. But it's one of those, it's because she wrote the book. So that's why she gets the credit for it. But he's the one that wrote the screenplay for it.
He did he basically, I think, rewrote, like, he took her screenplay for the movie and basically completely edited and rewrote it.
Right.
And I remember one of the main things I remember about this time period was the controversies around Interview with a Vampire. Yep. I remember, because my dad was a big Anne Rice fan, and I remember like kind of public outcries against the movie. I think like she was like really, even though she wrote the screenplay and obviously it's her story, she like was very anti this movie until she saw the final product. And then I think she was like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Right.
There's also the Tom Cruise controversy about how she hated his casting, and that was a big thing. I even remember my dad being upset. Like, he's Tom Cruise isn't a stat. Come on, this is terrible.
Right.
And looking at what we have now, the glory of Sam Reed on the show. Yeah. It almost feels like if Chris Hemsworth now was alive in 1994, he felt he could have been a Lestat if they wanted that like big name actor, because I mean, look, it's 1994. Tom Cruise is still A-list as much as he is right now. He was A-list then. So I get like the idea of the studio wanting like the biggest A-list actor they can find.
Right.
But like, I envision like if like a Sam Reed type, like having just seen Furiosa, I could imagine like Chris Hemsworth dialing back the Australian, but taking that like craziness of the Dementis character with his like, flowing blonde Thor hair and being a great Lestat in 1994. But yeah, I remember all those controversies, and when I saw the movie, being just a silly 12-year-old who liked horror, I was like, I don't know why people are upset. This movie is really good.
Yeah. Well, Tom Cruise is fantastic, and Anne Rice, like you said, didn't end up kind of, apologizing for making the comments about the movie, and she even apologized to Tom Cruise for what she said about his casting. And it's funny because when she wrote the movie in 1976 and it was in development hell, her person that she picked for Lestat over time was Julian Sands.
I could see that. Julian Sands, early 90s. Yeah.
Yep.
Like
and then
a room with a view, Julian Sands.
Right.
Okay.
And so then when Tom Cruise was cast, she still kept making suggestions for other Lestats, like other people that could play Lestat. Here's some of the other choices right here on the ticker. So besides Tom Cruise, she wanted John Malkovich, who was like super, I'm not going to say hot because that's weird to describe John Malkovich as hot. His career was hot in the early 90s. Peter Weller. Could you imagine a Peter Weller Lestat?
He'd be in the makeup asking people to bring him Oreos.
Yes, with the fangs. Yes.
Put the Oreos on my fangs.
It's fucking awesome, man. Yeah, it's just a totally different movie, And then there's one other interesting thing too, is that when development hell, she was concerned that Hollywood's homophobia, which at the time there was much more of that than it is nowadays. She thought that she should rewrite Louis as a woman, so that there's not this like homophobic or not homophobic, but homosexual context. So could you imagine the movie if it was Lestat as a man and Louis is a woman?
I mean, having not read the book, I probably would not have known any better at the time, but it does make sense given that time period. I mean, I think this is a year after Philadelphia came out. Philadelphia was
Sounds
one
right.
of the first movies that really tackled like the issue of homosexuality and the AIDS crisis and everything.
Right.
Like in terms of like major mainstream movies, I'm sure there's been countless others, but like just thinking about that time period in the early 90s. And being 12 years old when this came out, I didn't see, it didn't occur to me that there was any homosexual context or subtext between these two characters. Now, obviously, watching the show and understanding the books as they were written, it makes so much more sense.
Yes.
And having just rewatched the movie, they even hint at that Louis and Armand relationship.
Oh yeah.
Between Brad Pitt and Antonio Banderas. They even hint at that.
Right.
Where again, as a 12-year-old, I never picked up on that at all. And it's just, I can't imagine now having this story without that subtext or just flat out context right in front of you, because that's what drives these characters. Like it's almost a love story between Louis and Armand on the series. Going Assad Zaman and Jacob Anderson are so good in their roles, and then of course you have Sam Reed and Jacob Anderson, and then there's I'm sure we'll get flashbacks. Last week we saw the flashback to Armand and Lestat, and it's like it's all right there. And there's even the subtext to Daniel and Daniel's previous whatever they are, homosexual leanings. And I can't imagine thinking about these characters in the story without that now.
Oh, of course.
But I also can imagine that in 1994, if you're producing this movie and if you're given the obvious different, 1993, Bill Clinton signs the "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" policy. So it was, the issue of just being gay was very different. I think it's very appropriate we're talking about this now that it's June, but yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go. Pride Month. Score, man. Good job. I thought I was the king of segues on the show. But no, in the interview with the Vampire Show now, it's not even subtext. It's like straight out text. It's all about the love of these characters. And you started to kind of mention all of the actors on the show, and we've done this in our reviews where we start to compare the different versions. What I was thinking was, as I was thinking about how I was so sad that you watched the Queen of the Damned movie, but you had not read the Queen of the Damned book. And I was like, God damn it. Like this story is ruined for you because you've seen this subpar movie. Whereas the book is fucking amazing, right? And the book, The Vampire Lestat, is fucking amazing. And so I was thinking about, I was like, what can we compare this to? What's a metaphor for this? And I was thinking about cover songs, right? There's certain songs that are like these iconic, amazing songs by incredible bands, and then there are covers of them. Now, seeing Queen of the Damned is like seeing a lame cover song or listening to a lame cover song when the original amazing song is out there, and you're like, oh, I don't really like that song. It's like the books are the original song.
A song written by Jonathan Davis, of course.
There you go. I saw your finger moving. You're like, I gotta get this one in, But yeah, it's like, okay, imagine Korn is covering this. Now, I actually like Korn, but not everyone's gonna be like classic rock Korn. You know,
Yeah.
and I think that Korn, this is a great way to tie it all together. Great job, man. Is they do Another Brick in the Wall, right? You listen to Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd, you're like, this is Jesus Christ, this is revolutionary. Then you hear the Korn version, like, okay, all right, you know. So
Now,
like,
if it was the version on the Faculty soundtrack, now that kicked fucking ass.
yes, and totally random since we're kind of doing this, dude. How good is the fucking cover of "Summer Breeze" by Typo Negative in the beginning of my? I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Oh,
Remember
yeah.
fantastic, right? So, but my point I'm trying to say is that like the books are like the original iconic song, and then there are some amazing covers. The AMC show is an amazing cover, right, of the book. But then, go
It's
ahead.
Jimi Hendrix doing All Along the Watchtower.
That's a great fucking metaphor. Yes, exactly. And you know what? This 1994 movie is not a bad cover. So let's talk about the differences between these characters and the story itself, right? The characters are wholly different from each other in all the cases. Let's talk about Louis, the two Louis. You got Jacob Anderson's Louis versus Brad Pitt's Louis. So go ahead. I'm tossing the ball to you.
I mean, it, it's hard because Brad Pitt is Brad Pitt at the end of the day. You know, there are certain people that are just movie stars.
Right.
And like Charlotte walked in while I was watching Interview with the Vampire, the movie, and I told her this came out 30 years ago, and her response was, "But he looks the same."
Yep.
And then we both kind of looked at each other and went, "Is he a vampire?" Like, and
Yeah.
and so it's I almost feel bad in a way for
Yeah.
movie stars who want to like be actors. It's a
Mhm.
weird because it's very hard. It's very easy for Jacob Anderson, who some people might remember as that one guy in Game of Thrones.
Right. Great
It's
one.
very easy for him to become a brand new character and have everybody forget about his past in Game of Thrones. Whereas Brad Pitt is fucking Brad Pitt, you know?
Right.
So, and he wasn't as much Brad Pitt in 1994, but he was still Brad Pitt. He was still a very much of that time actor. He had just done the River Runs Through It and oh god, he
Cool
was real.
world.
He was like really reaching like the pinnacle of his like stardom. Like he was going to do Seven the year after. It came out in 1995, and so I think Brad Pitt is good as Louis. I just think that character is done better when we are given more time to kind of feel with him. And I think it's not even that I would say Jacob Anderson is better than Brad Pitt as Louis. I think that the series so far has been a better interpretation of the material than the movie. And again, it's obvious. You have 45 to 50 minutes an episode for multiple seasons of television versus
Yeah.
I think 2 hours on screen. Like we
Right.
were talking about the theater vampires, that is now stretched out for 3-4 episodes of season 2. Where
Yeah.
in the movie, that entire sequence from meeting Armand and Santiago to the theater to Louis getting his revenge after they kill Claudia, I think it's a half hour of the movie.
That's crazy.
So it's hard to kind of compare the actors because I think they both do a really good job with the medium in which they're taking part in. I think Brad Pitt being that movie star caliber. I mean, look, when Brad Pitt goes into the theater waving a scythe around, slicing vampires in half and setting things on fire, you're like, fuck me, this is awesome.
Yes.
And when Jacob Anderson is, you know, walking under the streets of Paris with Armand, thinking he's going to get killed, and it turns into kind of like a proposition of an admittance of love. It's awesome. So it's very different. They're acting in different mediums, and I think they probably are both perfect for what they're doing.
Wow, wow. Really, really well put, man. And it's kind of making me regret that I made all these tickers that are essentially this actor versus this actor, right? So I guess, but
Well,
here's
look,
the thing. Go ahead.
I'll be the first. I'll be maybe the first and only person to say that. Give me Sam Reed over Tom Cruise.
Right. But I mean, no. Yeah, the Tom Cruise and Sam Reed. That's the really. Hold on. This is what's up with this ticker. Tom Cruise and Sam Reed. Like, why is it? I'll fix this while I'm talking. They're like night and day, but then they are also both truly Lestat. And what's really interesting is that like Anne Rice was really against the casting of Tom Cruise, as we said before. But then when she saw him in film, she's like, oh, he actually is Lestat. Like one of the things about Tom Cruise is that he has maybe the most incredible willpower out of any human I've ever seen. And he always does his own stunts. He's always driven to learn things, to push himself. And I think that he probably heard the aspersions from Anne Rice and was like, I'm going to just be the best fucking Lestat there is. And I think that he was until Sam Reed.
What Tom Cruise has done in like the Mission Impossible movies, if there was probably a way for him to become a vampire for this movie, he would have done it. He's like in not Mission Impossible, in Top Gun Maverick, like he got to fly in Air Force jets and go at like Mach 10.
Right.
He's literally hanging off the airplane in Ghost Protocol. I think it's Ghost Protocol.
Yes, it is.
He does insane things. I think the better comparison would be obviously to include Stuart Townsend in this. I'm also being completely facetious because that poor man.
Right, I do have a ticker that goes Tom Cruise versus Sam Reed versus Stuart Townsend. That's for our Queen of the Damned segment.
Yeah.
But no. It's interesting though, right? Because when you bring up Lestat and Louis, right? Because obviously they are the main people in these two adaptations. It is like a cover song where there are the beats of the song. You're like, oh, this is that part. This is that part of the song, right? And there's scenes that are in the AMC show and are in this, right? And one of the most iconic scenes in this movie, the 1994 movie, is when Lestat and Louis are with these two French women, and then one of them is already dead, and the other one is about to die, and Lestat like torments her. And, he puts her in a coffin. And I remember like watching it as a kid and being like, oh man, this is pretty rough, this scene. And there's the same exact scene in the AMC show too. They're both like really horrible scenes, but it's just interesting when you watch these interpretations, these covers of the original source material. It's like they're hitting the same beats. And I think with both actors, Sam Reed and Tom Cruise, they both hit those beats perfectly in those scenes. And that happens for multiple scenes in both of these stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cruise is again, he brings that movie star like gravitas to this role, and he's so menacing at the beginning,
right?
But then he's also capable of being Tom Cruise, and he's charming and everything. I remember as a kid, like the ending legitimately scared me because I thought there's the scene where he gets like killed and fed to the alligators, and then he like comes back and he's like a rotting corpse, and when he like shows up in the car at the end, I was like, whoa, like legit creeped me out. I didn't expect that.
Right. No, but Lestat, it's funny because I don't think that the Sam Reed Lestat is as goofy as the Tom Cruise Lestat. The Tom Cruise Lestat is like a little goofy in some ways. But they're both like ridiculously confident. I mean, Sam Reed, I know that he actually liked the Anne Rice books and he like kind of rose to the occasion to be Lestat. Like he like learned how to play certain instruments and stuff because he knew he was going to be Lestat. I think that Tom Cruise, just being Tom Cruise, exudes overconfidence. That's just because who he naturally is. I think Lestat and Louis, for the most part, are the same kind of character in both adaptations. We just see more, like you said before. It's when we see the real difference is when we get to Claudia, because I feel like Claudia, they literally, I mean, they do change Louis's background too in the movie and then the show, but Claudia is like literally a different age and stuff, right? So let's do this one now. Let's talk about the different versions of Claudia.
I mean, watching the movie again with fresh eyes,
yeah,
it is amazing how great Kirsten Dunst is, especially given that this is her first movie.
Yep.
And the actors that she is surrounded with at almost all times.
Yep.
She is stealing the spotlight as an 11-year-old from Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And you walk out of this movie, and I know I did as a 12-year-old boy, just completely enamored with her.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see every movie that she had ever done. I remember when I heard she got cast as Mary Jane, I think I was like the happiest person in the world, because I was like, yes, I love her. Awesome.
Right.
I love both actresses who have been on the show so far. I think Delaney Hales this season has been fantastic.
Yeah.
But like, Kirsten Dunst, to me, and again, yes, there is an age difference between the actors playing Claudia and a slight age difference in the characters. But Kirsten Dunst in that first movie is completely stealing spotlights, and it's just amazing. Like, I remember thinking she was great in it, and then rewatching it, it's mind-boggling how good she is, given that it's her first role, and that she's basically, the movie came out when she was 12, so she was basically 11 when filming, which is incredible.
Yeah. The Kirsten Dunst in the 1994 movie kind of reminds me of Ali. I think it is Alia, actually. Yeah, Paul's sister from Dune, in the David Lynch version, and in the book too. Because in the book and stuff, she's alive and 4 years old by the time the story's over, right? But there's that idea of like being way older than their physical body, and how creepy that is. I think that like the Kirsten Dunst version is much more of like a monster type character, because it's like this killer that's in this little kid body, and it's this old person in a kid body. So it automatically makes you feel you're not at ease, right? Looking at her. With the modern version, the Bailey Bass and Delaney Hales, it's like it's just like this young woman that you kind of feel like her struggles. You're like, oh, I kind of feel for her. There's much more empathy towards her.
That the last episode that we covered, there's that great scene where she's like so excited to join the theater of the vampires, and she's like super excited, and then they give her the dress, and they're like, here's the role that you're gonna play for the next 50 years. You're gonna play, and like you can see like in her eyes, like just everything, like all the joy that she felt about finding like contemporaries, and it all kind of melted away, and the reality of, oh, I'm this forever, and I'll never be seen as anything more than this. And it's and you do kind of feel bad for her, whereas Kirsten Dunst, Claudia, she is, like you said, very monstrous. Like, she's like, let's just keep killing people. I'm hungry, let's eat. And there's that great scene where like she rips out all of her hair, and then like she turns around and it's like whoosh, her hair's back, and she's like, I can't even rip out my own hair. I was really blown away watching it a second time. Like, she's younger than our oldest daughters.
Yes, it's fucking ridiculous.
Who are barely teenagers, and she's younger than them, and she's taken the spotlight from A-level actors, you know?
Yeah, really good point. Yeah. So I mean, like, we have our main three that are in both stories right now, and now we get to the supporting characters. And I think one of the biggest differences is the interviewer himself, right? Originally, when they had Daniel Malloy, the original casting was River Phoenix, and River Phoenix died before the filming could begin. And Christian Slater was then cast as Daniel Malloy. Christian Slater, he actually took all of his earnings from this movie and put it towards
Right then.
charities. Yeah, that River Phoenix's family put into place, right? So Daniel Malloy, however, it's a different situation because they're implying that Daniel Malloy in the show did the interview like the way it goes down in 1976 in the book, but that like this is essentially round two of the interview. So you have like a human that's not like, oh my god, it's vampires the way that Christian Slater is. It's more like, yeah, I know these fuckers. I'm gonna go get this story again now. So, and then there's also this like interwoven mystery with Daniel where something happened during that original
Yeah.
interview, and that's completely different from the book too. So, I don't know. I think it's just really interesting how different these characters are and how different their story is. What do you think?
Again, having not read the book, it feels like Christian Slater is kind of just an extraneous character. Like he has, like the name of the movie is Interview with the Vampire. So you have to have an interviewer, and
Yeah,
so he almost feels like he doesn't matter. And then it's
right.
like at the end, he has this like dramatic shift of like, oh my god, your life seems so cool, quick, bite me, I want to be a vampire. And then he like very quickly is like scared off of that, and he's like, oh fuck, you're a vampire, I have to get out of here. and and so he doesn't really have any development as a character. He's just interviewer. Like you, I don't even know if I would have known the name Daniel Malloy or Daniel even, and that's my fucking name. Even having rewatched the movie, he's just like, for me, he's just Christian Slater interviewing Brad Pitt, and
Right.
and then he runs away and gets attacked by Tom Cruise. Whereas Eric Bogosian is a defined character. Like
Right.
he, like you said, they established that there's this mysterious backstory to Daniel with
Right.
Louis and Armand, and we're kind of uncovering that as we go along. So I also really love the intercut scenes where you're following the vampire story, and then it'll cut back to this rich millionaire palatial estate that they're like recording in with the gorgeous view, and Eric Bogosian will just drop some like real sarcastic line, and he's genuinely funny, and again, I don't want to make it. I happen to really like Christian Slater as an actor. I don't think that he's a developed character in the movie, whereas Daniel Malloy is a character in the show. He's not just guy there to get interview.
Yeah.
Which is what Christian Slater feels like.
Right. Really, really good point. And it's interesting, right? Because you were talking about how much Daniel's story is like fleshed out and there's so much more to it. And then you started to talk about the modern day stuff and like the setting of the interview. That is a really interesting part because like Armand is not fucking there during the interview at all. It is like it is in the movie, the 1994 movie, where it's just Brad Pitt, just Christian Slater, and they're just talking like that. There isn't all these like servants and like this kind of estate that you're talking about. So that is a significant difference too, right there, the way that everything is set. I mean, they're very different beasts, but both are really good. And then let's just kind of talk about the last of like the main people, because we already kind of talked about Santiago last time and this time too. Go ahead. You're gonna say something?
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh, well, so Antonio Banderas, right? So I actually really like Antonio Banderas as a person. I think he's great as an actor. I love seeing him in movies. My wife and my daughter are not impressed with his version of Armand. My wife is always like, oh, I don't really like Armand. I like all the other ones, but I don't like Armand. And I always think of in the trailers, there's that scene where Armand runs his hand over a candle and he goes like that. You're right. And that just sticks into my mind, Sorry to give you an orgasm face at 7 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, I think that he really stands out, and he wasn't as well known as the other actors in 1994. So he was almost like exotic for Antonio Banderas, right? But then you see this version of Armand played by Assad Zaman, and it's like a different beast altogether, and exotic in his own way, but like very different. Go ahead. What were you
Yeah.
going to say about these two?
No, I think this is just another case of like the mediums that they're working in. Like I had no idea who Assad Zaman was
Right.
before I saw him. So when I look at him, I don't look at him as, oh, that guy who played this. I look at him as Armand.
Right.
And I'm able to just fully get into the Armand character. Whereas, yes, Antonio Banderas was not Tom Cruise in 1994, but he had just done Desperado. If you were a Robert Rodriguez fan, you knew who he was. And he had just played, speaking of Philadelphia, he was Tom Cruise, Jesus. He was Tom Hanks's lover in Philadelphia. So he was, he was known. And so it's funny because the second you said the trailer, I think of that.
Right.
One moment.
Right.
And Armand is such a, again, he's kind of an extraneous character. He shows up almost 80 to 90 minutes into the movie. He's only there for that one part. He's not there for the worst of that part.
Correct.
And then it's interesting because like we were talking about how we are almost up to this part in the show. Like Armand, the theater, they've introduced the concept of burying vampires in the wall, which is what happens to Louis, and Armand frees Louis in the movie.
Right.
We obviously know what happens to Claudia in the movie, so like we're waiting for that. And we're waiting for Louis's revenge, and it's just I know these characters so much better in the show. I'm really interested to see how they handle the romance between Louis and Armand, given what happens to Claudia.
Yes.
Whereas we don't get that in the movie. Again, having rewatched it, it's very obvious that Louis and Armand are into each other in the movie.
Yeah.
I did not pick up on that as a 12-year-old, but I picked up on it as a 42-year-old watching it again.
Yeah.
And so had there been a direct sequel to the 1994 movie, and had they had the courage at the time to dabble in those homosexual elements, it would have been quite an interesting movie to see, like a movie that focused more on Louis and Armand together post Paris, kind of like what we're getting in the show. But I think Antonio Banderas was fine for what he was asked to do, and he's not in the movie that much. He's probably the third or fourth build.
Right. And it's funny, right? Because I see you kind of setting up the segue for Queen of the Damned. You're like, direct sequel. And it's like, now we're going to talk about Queen of the Damned. And, because we're like 44 minutes into our usual, like, kind of like hour recording, and we're still talking about the original movie. What's interesting with the Armand stuff that you're just talking about just now, my daughter just recently read the book, and she was pointing out how, like, in the book, Louis with Armand for way longer. In the show, they make it like Louis is with Armand currently, like still. They've been together since this time in Paris. But in the book, it's like the movie, but the movie makes it seem very brief. Like it's like, Louis gets his revenge, then he goes up to Armand, he's like, oh, we can't be together, and he leaves. Whereas in the book, it's like they're with each other for a while, and then he leaves eventually, you know? So that's one of the significant changes from the book to the show and the 1994 movie. Now, there's two other major changes between the 1994 movie and the book. One of them we've already seen because in the movie they don't have any other vampires besides the Theater of the Vampire and the main guys, right? But in the book, you have these other vampires, or at least one other vampire that Louis and Claudia meet, right? This older
like
vampire.
the feral
Yes.
ones in the woods. Yeah.
The one that throws themselves in the fire. It happens in the book too. Now, Daddy, there's this one significant change in the plot that's not in the 1994 movie, but it's in the book, and I know it's coming on the show, and I don't want to spoil it for you because there is a major difference with the Theater of the Vampire part in the book than here, and I didn't know about it until my daughter told me about it. So I'm not going to go into it here because I want that moment to hit when it hits.
Well, when that happens in the show, then we'll talk about that because I'm very happy you're not going to spoil it for me because I'm looking forward almost in trepidation of what we know is going to happen, especially with Claudia.
Yeah.
Right,
because I remember my daughter like describing that part to me, and I was like, wait, that what? That's totally different from the 1994 movie. So we'll get to that. It's probably like 2 or 3 episodes from now. But you, my friend, we're setting up the segue. Let's finish it off with the end of our hour with the not so fortunate sequel, right? So Anne Rice wanted to make a sequel to the 1994 movie, and the rights were owned by Warner Brothers up until 2000. And it was very similar to like Fantastic Four and 20th Century Fox, where they had to make a movie to retain the rights. And so they ended up making this movie that was directed by Michael Reimer. Now, Anne Rice, she wrote a screenplay for The Vampire Lestat, but a lot of people felt like it was an unfilmable movie. It's like the span of his whole fucking life, right? I mean, not like Interview with the Vampire is not Louis' life, but whatever, right? So let's talk about Michael Reimer for a second, though. Do you know anything about him?
I quickly looked him up, and he basically did a couple of movies, and then after Queen of the Damned, it seems like he made a full switch off to TV. Now, in terms of TV, he's worked on some really great shows. He did 9 episodes of Hannibal, which is one of the best fucking series. Talk about movies taken from books and then a TV series that does those characters fucking justice. Hannibal is up there with some of the best shows I've ever watched. And he directed 9 episodes of that, which I think is the most of any show that he's done, but he's done like multiple episodes of multiple shows.
Right.
I was looking, I think the only movie I had seen that he had did was like an Omar Epps movie called In Too Deep.
Oh, yes.
But aside from that, I hadn't seen any of his other movies.
Yeah.
Now you were telling me that basically Queen of the Damned is half Vampire Lestat, half Queen of the Damned.
More or less,
and
yes.
And that you love both of those books independently.
Yes. I love them both, and there are major changes from the books to this movie too that are very upsetting. And when I initially saw it, I was like, "Oh, why'd they do that? That sucks," you know. But it's funny because when we talk about the choices and stuff made for this movie, Michael Reimer, he's the director. I would say he's no Neil Jordan, and he also directed a lot of episodes of Battlestar Galactica. I always remember hearing that he directed that too. There's 2 men that wrote the screenplay for this movie versus like Neil Jordan writing the screenplay for the movie, the Interview with the Vampire movie. Is Michael Petroni, Pederoni, I'm sorry. Now, I think you might recognize his name from at least one of his recent movies, but he did Chronicles of Narnia, Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is actually good. I like that movie. He did The Book Thief, which I think was actually kind of a hit or did well. And then, of course, The Pope's Exorcist. Is that a surprise?
It's The Pope's Exorcist. Hey, I'm a Russell Crowe. Hey, what are you, possessed? But listen, I fucking love The Pope's Exorcist. So
there he goes. So
Yeah.
Michael Pederoni wrote it, and then he also did a movie called The Right, which is with Anthony Hopkins. I never saw that, but
Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah, the RITE, the right. Yes.
correct. Yeah, it's got like a cross and Anthony Hopkins' face in the poster.
Hmm.
So I just feel like I'm sorry, Queen of the Damned feels like those kind of movies. Like that's sort of like that early 2000s kind of possession demony kind of movie that's like
I
yeah.
I said it in my short, and I mentioned it earlier. If you could distill the year 2002 into 140 minutes, I'm sorry, an hour and 40 minutes, it would be Queen of the Damned. You have, uh, you know, you have Aaliyah, who was a super popular rap star at the time, actress who unfortunately, of course, passed away in a plane crash right before this movie came out. The movie is
Right.
dedicated to her.
Right.
I even read that um, a lot of her ADR work was done by her brother, um, because they had a very similar voice, and that they like changed it in post, and they like altered his voice to make it sound more feminine. Uh,
Whoa, that is
the
crazy.
the special effects are really early aughts. There's a lot of like vampires lunging and like terrible CGI like trails of them. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and then of course you have just the absolute awesomeness of the early aughts horror movie soundtrack featuring six original songs written by Jonathan Davis, um, Disturbed, Papa Roach, The Deftones, Static X. It's like Bride of Chucky, Scream 3, The Crow, City of Angels. All of these late 90s, early 2000s movies that really pumped out that new metal. And look, I'm not even going to lie. I was 20 when this movie came out, and I was all about that shit.
Yep. Yep.
And when this movie started, and I had never seen this before, and when this movie started, and Lestat is supposed to be singing, and he's singing Forsaken, a song that I've listened to for 20 years,
Right.
and I know the Disturbed version of that song by Dave Draymond,
Yeah.
and I'm like, is Jonathan Davis Lestat in this movie? What the fuck is going on? And then I look, and he, of course, Jonathan Davis of Korn. Not only did he write six songs for this movie, but he does the singing voice for Stuart Townsend Lestat. Which, could you even imagine today casting an actor who can't sing? I mean, that would be like casting Russell Crowe in Les Miserables. Oh, fuck.
Oh, second Russell
Uh,
Crowe reference of the day so far.
yeah, he was a better in the Pope's Exorcist.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
oh man. But yeah, like I feel like today they would just cast um somebody who can sing, and they would have them sing in the
Right.
movie instead
Right.
of having to like ADR the Korn lead singer
Right.
for him. It's and the second the movie started, and that's the music video that they're playing, is the Vampire Lestat's Forsaken, and I'm like, oh, this is the movie we're going to be watching now.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so funny. I think about the trailer for Interview with the Vampire again, the 1994 one, and I think about this part where there's like Louis and Claudia on a ship, and they're like going through, they're like passing a European city, it's probably like France or something, in the night, and it's just so beautiful and epic. And Neil Jordan says that he wanted to make this epic vampire movie, was inspired by like Gone with the Wind, and then you have Disturbed playing Down with the Sickness in Death Valley. That it's like, whoa, we've come a long way between these two movies. You know what I'm saying? And I feel bad because like I think that Stuart Townsend is a talented actor. It's just what he was given. We keep
I'm
talking
not
about.
I'm not sure about that.
Oh, okay.
And listen, I'm not trying to be mean.
Right.
But if you look at his filmography,
Right.
there isn't much of one. He was like
Okay.
a semi-hot property in those early aughts. I think he plays Dorian Gray in the League of
He
Extraordinary
does.
Gentlemen.
He does.
And then after that, he's not much in anything.
Okay.
His greatest role was playing Charlize Theron's boyfriend in real life.
Okay. I was like, what?
They were together for 8 years, and like I remembered that. Like I was like, wasn't this guy with Charlize Theron?
Oh, good for him, man.
Yeah, good for him. I mean, he's a good looking guy, but he just doesn't. Again, when you're coming from Tom Cruise, who's the most movie star who's ever movie starred, to and I'm trying not to sound mean, but it's a real downgrade when you go from that to Stuart Townsend, who in 2002 nobody knew who he was. He wasn't a household name. He hadn't had that major hit that like, oh, you could say I'm going to cast him based on this,
Right. Right.
Like I'm looking at the bottom of your screen now. All three of those actors, Wes Bentley was just coming off of American Beauty, where he was Ricky Fitz,
right.
and he was, and I could almost see him as like, because he's almost vampire-like in American Beauty. He's very strange in that movie. Josh Hartnett had just done The Faculty. He had done Halloween H2O. He was a relatively new actor, but he was already making a name for himself, especially in horror. Heath Ledger was. Did this movie come out after 10 Things I Hate About You?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Might
Because
be.
that movie feels like it was like a 2000, 2001-ish movie. And it is like any of those three guys,
Yeah.
I think would have been better. I think this movie died for me with Stuart Townsend because you don't meet the Queen of the Damned for 50 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I think there's like a fast edit where Aaliyah pops up on the screen and then pops off of the screen when he's looking at that statue. And then you don't see her in the flesh, I think, until about the 50-minute mark of an hour and 40-minute movie.
Right.
Like Godzilla in the 2014 movie.
Right.
And you almost are sitting there going, what movie am I watching? Where is this Queen of the Damned?
Right.
And so you're stuck with Lestat, and he's just boring.
Yes.
He's a boring rock star. And
yes. Okay, Danny just totally fell off the. Okay, he's coming back, but let's get him back on here. He said he's boring. What happened there?
Oh, I have no idea. I just popped off and popped on.
Lestat's boring.
Yeah, well, he is. But like, I love. Like, I remember having like a crush on Marguerite Moreau because she was like the cute girl in the Mighty Ducks.
Oh.
And like to see her as an adult and like as a love interest, I was like, oh, this could be interesting. And then it's not. And it's just a very, again, it just feels like this could be any 2000 to 2003 horror movie that does like 2 weeks in the theater and then goes out on DVD. And ends up having like multiple direct-to-DVD sequels, like The Skulls, or I think there was actually a movie called Forsaken, with like Kerr Smith, like, yeah, like it feels like there's so many of these type of movies that came out around that time, and it was so disappointing given. These are the characters, and as somebody who didn't read the book, I'm listening to you talk about how like The Vampire Lestat is like your favorite book, and I'm like, really? Because this is the movie they made out of it. Like I will say this: you might have inspired me to like read The Vampire Lestat. Because I want to see this story done right, and I'm obviously not going to get that in this movie, so I might as well check out the book.
Yeah, I wonder because I know you're an Audible guy. I wonder if there's like a version where Sam Reed is reading the book, because
Oh
they do that
God.
with like Andy Serkis and for Lord of the Rings and stuff. But yeah, let's talk about how this movie hurt me as a big Anne Rice fan. Everything.
Show me on the doll where
Yeah,
Queen of the Damned hurt you.
right. In my soul, that's where I'm going to point to my soul. There's so many characters in this movie, and at the very end of the movie, many of them are just flung off and burned to a crisp. And you're like, who the fuck was that? Some kind of weird homeless looking person just got thrown off
I
of
didn't
Aaliyah.
know I didn't know anybody's name in this movie other than
Right.
Jesse, Lestat, and Akasha.
Right,
Oh, and
right,
Marius. He was the only other one. Yes,
right.
that was the only other character's name I knew.
And so when Marius shows up in the movie, I'm like, oh, it's that guy that played the Crow in City of Angels. He's
Oh my
the
God, that is. Oh wow.
Vincent Perez, right? So, okay, there's many changes from the book to the movie for this one, but one of them that really hurts is that Marius is the one that's Lestat's maker in this movie. It's like, no, he's not. No, he's not. I mean, Lestat does meet Marius, but he's not his maker. This guy named Magnus is his maker. They even mention him on the AMC show. But I think Vincent Perez actually does a fairly decent job as Marius. He is like the caretaker of these two ancient vampires that are so old that they've essentially like turned to stone. Like the older you get as a vampire, your skin becomes harder, colder, and they've eventually like become like statues, the Akasha and her king, right? And that sequence where Lestat is playing a violin and she kind of comes to life, that happens in the Vampire Lestat. It's actually a pretty accurate interpretation of that scene where like it's like kind of shocking that he woke her up, but then her waking up and coming to life is in Queen of the Damned. Like the Vampire Lestat book ends with him having that concert, and Jesse is in it. I mean, I don't really spoil too much of this because this might be in the shows too at one point, but it's just like disappointing seeing how they choose to have certain moments, because certain things are like these amazing moments that are just as good as anything in the Interview with the Vampire movie or show, but they're just utterly wasted in this interpretation. And one last thing I want to kind of bring up is that you have the introduction of like the Talamasca, and you have the introduction of Akasha, the queen herself, and they are these like super interesting things in the book. But here they're just basically, I don't know, like story beats. They're nothing. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing to Akasha whatsoever.
No, it really just feels like they got Aaliyah,
Yeah.
who was gorgeous, and they were like, let's put her in this outfit and let's have her walk around and go like this. She almost reminded me of, oh God, who's that awful like villain from
Suicide Squad.
Suicide Squad.
Yep.
Where it's like her entire character
Enchantress.
trait. Yes, her entire character trait was weird arm movements. Yeah. And it just felt like she was an undefined character, which is very weird for the title role, where she's like the marketing of the movie. Like they don't market, and I think that really says a lot. Again, I'm really beating the hell out of Stuart Townsend here, but it really says a lot about Stuart Townsend as Lestat, where the entire marketing of this movie was Aaliyah, and it's called Queen of the Damned and not the Vampire Lestat. In fact, I bet you most people didn't even know that this was a sequel, even a spiritual sequel to Interview with the Vampire. Right. And I think that says everything that you need to say. There's just no connection to that earlier movie. There's no connection to these characters, and the new characters who we're supposed to know and fear and be intrigued by are, like you said, they're literally thrown off to the side and burned alive before I even learn their name.
Right.
Like Lena Olin shows up, and I was like, oh, it's Barbara Hershey. Good to see Barbara Hershey here. And then I'm looking on IMDb and I'm like, nope, that's Lena Olin. They are that not the same actress. And like again, she apparently makes this big sacrifice that I didn't really understand because I
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm not going to spoil this because I want you to enjoy it when it's on TV, and AMC does a much better job. But believe me when I say that there is this like interesting backstory that explains how vampires were created and why Akasha is the queen or the mother and her connection to Jesse's aunt, right? Like Jessie has significance because of her aunt, and her aunt is significant because of this whole origin of vampires thing. I'm not going to spoil it because AMC will eventually do a really awesome job interpreting all of this. But this movie just bypasses that completely. She just has this old aunt who's a vampire, and they're like, "Hey, we got to stop Akasha," and literally, there's just like no thought or anything intriguing. Just Akasha's like, "I'm here. I'm gonna take over. You're gonna listen to me." And then like Lestat drinks her blood. They all just suck on her like a bunch of ticks, and then she just fucking dies. You know,
so
like that's
let me ask you because I was curious about this watching this. In the books, Lestat and Akasha, are they like a hot item for a little bit?
yes, that does kind of happen.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I'm sure you've seen this like big online debate, mostly on the cesspool that is Twitter,
Oh, great.
about like whether or not sex scenes need to happen in movies. Like, oh, sex scenes are just uncomfortable and they don't mean anything, and movies are better off without them. And I don't buy into that at all. But
Right.
if there was ever, if there was ever a movie that needed a hard R sex scene, and I'm not saying this to be perverted, it felt like this was that movie. This movie needed a hard R sex scene between Lestat and Akasha, because
Yeah.
that would have at least given me the idea that these two are these like uber vampires that need, like, can take over the world together. And
Yes.
instead it's like they're on screen together for what feels like two scenes,
Yep.
and in like they don't even like kiss or anything. He like wakes up, they're in the sunlight, there's bodies on the beach, and then the next scene he's like her like obedient slave, and she's throwing people off to the side and they're burning.
Wait. I want to just make sure. I want to clarify. You are also going to admit that there was a scene where like they're in a tub together and there's rose petals and her hand comes out. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh yeah, but like that scene, there's nothing to that scene. Like you
Yeah.
don't see
Well,
anything.
there is one thing. They are playing Change in the House of Flies by the Deftones when that happens. And I was like, yeah, Deftones in a movie. That's cool. They're actually in a lot of soundtracks in that time period. But yeah, I don't know. I like that image of her coming out of the water, like with her hand going up his body and stuff. That's kind of sexy. But then there's just this weird imagery while they're in the tub together. There's not like Stuart Townsend on Aaliyah action like you're asking
I,
for here. Yeah.
it just like it feels like that. There are some times where like you need something, and
Yeah.
like it felt unearned that these characters were suddenly together the way that they were.
Yeah, there's sexier stuff between Brad Pitt and Antonio Banderas just in their interactions than there are between Lestat and Akasha in this,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So I mean, one day after you've either read the books or AMC gets caught up to this point in the series of the Queen of the Damned part, then we're going to talk about the differences between the book and this movie and the show and stuff, right? But for now, it's just basically this sort of like, I mean, we spent the majority of this time talking about the 94 movie and then just a very little time
with
talking about this
with
movie.
good reason.
Exactly. Because it's just ultimately forgettable, right?
Yeah.
So Danny, I know that like, we recorded this first and then we're going to do Interview with the Vampire after watching tonight's episode. I'm thinking I should actually put this out today on Sunday. So that way it's like people can watch this, then they can watch Interview with the Vampire and then watch our review. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that.
Hopefully, the idea that Queen of the Damned is in it doesn't turn off any viewers. But
Right. So,
yeah, I, it's a Sunday, so I'm very much looking forward to uh, the show tonight, and I'll probably be able to watch it live, and then we'll do our recording of that tomorrow. And if you guys want to check out all of our interview with the vampire, I keep saying coverage. We have reviews of episodes 1 and 2, and then we have a review of episode 3. This is only episode 4, right?
it is. I kept saying last week it was episode 4, but it's only episode 4
Yes,
tonight.
it's our third recording, but it's
Right.
our fourth episode.
Right.
And yeah, I have a whole bunch of short reviews. We covered all the Planet of the Apes movies, including the originals, the sequels. So there's that, and stay tuned for more Interview with a Vampire coverage.
Boom. That's right, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you for some more Lestat action next time.